Here you're at the April Policy and Personnel Committee meeting. The whole committee is here. Dr. Block, oh, here's Emily Bays, Ms. Melkonian, Dr. Shields, and Javi is here. So let's start. Dr. Shields, if you will.
Sorry, that was just Dr. Hines peeking in. So I think he'll be joining us shortly.
Would you like me to wait for him, or can we go ahead?
No, I think we can go ahead.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah. So I think as we look at the agenda, the minutes are there for the committee to have access to. They've been approved, and they'll be on a future Board of Education meeting for approval. Personnel update. Why don't I run through a few of the different positions that we have filled and that we are in the process of filling. So for example, last night, we, by resolution, selected the next assistant superintendent for curriculum instruction and assessment. It's Dr. Sean Feeney. That was handled at last night's Board of Education meeting for those people in the public who were not in attendance. We're in the process of finalizing a recommendation to the school board for the daily principal position. Those committee meetings have taken place, and it's now in the hands of central office to make that recommendation to the school board. The high school finalists, they are meeting this Thursday with the 3 different committees. So we should have feedback from those committee interviews the beginning of next week. The high school assistant principal position has been posted, and Jay Lewis, our interim high school principal, will work on filling that position very shortly. So I think that's a good summary of our personnel major positions that we're filling. As I mentioned to you last month, we have posted several of the teacher vacancies that exist due to the retirements that we've received throughout the year. So that's taking place. That's a routine matter that happens each spring. Any questions on that?
Dr. Block?
Yes. So Jim Restano, the head of facilities, is retiring. Can you give us an update on filling his position?
I don't believe that has been acted upon yet by the school board in the form of receiving a letter yet from him. So I would ask that we wait until next month, and I would give you possibly more of an update.
Thanks.
Ms. Melkonian?
Thank you. I understand that there was talk of focus groups for the high school principal position. Did they take place, and how will that information be used?
So I believe at least 2 of them have taken place. Mr. Lewis is leading those focus groups at the high school. The feedback's been very positive on how he's engaging with parents, staff members, and students. So I've received their summary of what they're looking for in the high school principal from 2 of those groups. I believe the student group is happening very shortly, if it hasn't happened within the last 24 hours. So then that information is being shared here at central office, and Dr. Hines will review the 3 documents, one from each of those 3 committees, and then give consideration to how does that connect with the people that we're considering as finalists.
Thank you. I have a second question. In terms of the assistant principal at the high school, are they following a different process for interviews than they have for the principal positions?
So the process for an assistant principal is different than for a principal. Principal positions are filled, the hiring process is led by central office. As an assistant principal, what we do is we post the position, and then we deliver the applicants to the principal that the assistant principal would report to. Then they screen the applicants. have a teacher committee meet some finalists, get feedback from them, then they make a recommendation to Dr. Hines and myself, who then considers that recommendation.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Okay. As committee chair, I'll say welcome to Dr. Feeney. The board had an opportunity to meet him yesterday at our Board of Ed meeting. And I will say I'm very excited. I'll speak for myself, but I think that given what the board knows, I know we're all very excited about this. So we will miss Dr. Meoli, but he's made his choice, right? He's moving on, so we had to make ours. And so welcome, Dr. Feeney. Okay. Hello, Dr. Hines. Okay. So item 1.3, please.
Yeah, so item 1.3 on the agenda is bringing a policy back to you that you have already had a good amount of discussion on. There were a couple of questions that came out of that discussion that we had last month. So for example, board members versus board trustees. I was asked to ask our school district attorney on if there's a preference on that. He prefers, while both are acceptable, the school district attorney prefers the use of the word trustees, but he said either is fine. Secondly, I wanted to make sure the committee knew that we changed in the bottom under the availability of the agenda. In line 2, board members will get 4 days in advance of the board meeting. That was feedback given to us by Dr. Hines's office as how the practice is taking place now. And I also checked with Elaine Fennick, our district clerk, to make sure that the policy read the way she would expect in delivering her role as a district clerk. And she thought the policy looked very good as is. So if the committee is okay with it, this, with any edits you would have today, would go on for a first reading at the next board meeting.
I have some minor comments. Does anybody have anything to say before I? Okay. So I just have a couple of questions. Thank you for all the edits. I see that in the text that's currently up on board docs, it says items, it refers to board member as opposed to board trustee. Shall we leave it as board member? Does it matter given what you said that the preference is trustee, but it could be either or?
I don't believe it matters one way or the other.
Okay. My next question is in the third paragraph, the first sentence, persons other than board members suggesting items of business must submit the item to the superintendent, blah, 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 in writing. I have a note here that we were going to say that we should CC the district clerk with a question mark. Are we CCing the district clerk? Are we saying to do that so that's not going just to the superintendent, but also to the district clerk?
I think that all depends on what level of specificity you want in the policy. I think we're just saying that any submissions would need to be in writing. As everyone knows here, the agenda is developed in the superintendent's office, and then the district clerk is obligated to make sure it's made available to the public.
Okay, so I think the question was, do we want to take some of the pressure off of the superintendent and have the district clerk as a backup? So I just highlighted it because I noticed it was something we discussed. So we don't need to put it in. I just want to make sure that I can cross this out on my list.
I'm fine with not needing to put the detail in.
Okay. Under availability of agenda, and I know this is, I think this is, it says the superintendent or their designee must have the agenda and any supporting materials for action items to board members 4 days in advance. Can we say instead of must have, just must provide I just must have me is, and I just, we say, just change it to must provide.
Sure.
The agenda, and these were 2 board members. Thank you. And then the last question I had again was a district clerk question. The last sentence in that paragraph where it says will be posted on the district's website and made available upon written request to the district clerk. I think we were just going to check, Dr. Hines was going to check with Denise and Ms. Fennick to make sure that was the process. I just want to make sure that, I know you said that you spoke with Ms. Fennick and she was okay with this. I just want to make sure that I can cross out that highlight too. Yes. Okay, good. Those are my only comments. Thank you. Nobody else? So I just had that one little word change and then we're good to go. Okay, so first read. Will that be, do you think that'll be at the April 12th meeting or is that too soon? Well, I'll let you know when you need to do it. So we'll be surprised. Okay. So the next item is 1.4.
Yes, I wanted to give you some background on 1.4. A couple of years ago, our director of technology approached central office and the school board about a program called the Federal E-Rate program. And that led to us applying for eligibility to participate in that program. There was approximately $900,000 of purchasing that was going to take place through this program that had to do with connections and networking, Wi-Fi, different switches. And part of that program is that you're able to receive 40% reimbursement participating in that program. So along with that comes a compliance component to it. So the federal E-Rate program has a consultant that has to review the district's policies to see if the language is in compliance with their program expects. So we've had some back and forth with that consultant. She's been very helpful. And she had these minor edits to our regulation that she asked that we put in place. It's already something that's in our practice, but she wanted the language into our regulation so she could show the E-Rate program that we're in compliance with all the language that's expected in our policies. So what I've presented to you are 2 edits to that regulation. One is under Roman numeral 4, the first bullet under training on page 2. And that's in italics. And the second one is under Roman numeral 5, a new italicized section at the bottom of the policy. And this has been approved by our director of technology, also approved by Christine Wise, who is our data protection officer and data manager. And I present it to you because it's important for the federal E-Rate program to be able to show that the policy has been modified in a public session, and we would put it on a board agenda with those edits.
As I read this, it strengthens our policy. If anything, it really strengthens our policy or our regulations to the policy. Any questions? No? Okay, great. So this is a regulation. Nothing was done to the policy itself, just the regulations.
Correct. She did not feel there was any need to edit any of the policy.
Okay, great. Okay, so we'll mark that as, I guess, revised as of the appropriate date and move on to the grading policy, item 1.5.
So yes, as I mentioned to you last month, the grading policy had been reviewed by administration, also been reviewed by the teacher leadership of the PWTA. And it is now back to the committee at your request to have it reviewed by this committee. For people in the public, this is a new policy grading. It's not one that we currently have on the books. but the language was taken from other districts and also from NISBA sample policies and is now presented back to you. There's great comfort on the contents of this policy, but of course we wanted to bring it back to you to see if there were any edits that you would have before it went on for a first reading of a new policy.
Any comments or questions? Dr. Block?
So just so I'm clear, this is a policy that we're seeing that has no changes, that there was a general agreement that this is a policy that's necessary for the district or valuable for the district?
This is a policy that we believe is valuable for the district. It is new.
Ms. Melconian? Okay.
Thank you.
So,
No, I'm sorry, I do.
oh, you do? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Well, thank you for this. If I remember correctly, when we were discussing this a few meetings back, we were talking about, I think Dr. Hines was the one that talked about this being at the 30,000 foot level, right? We weren't going to get into the weeds necessarily. So I have two questions on that. How and when do we get into the weeds? This is a great start. I have questions about the details and how we go lower than 30,000 feet. But I'll just leave that as a general question.
Excuse me, do you want to explain a little bit more what you mean about going into more detail? Because I understand the 30,000 feet. I understand what detail means, but I don't know what detail you mean.
Okay, so for example, in terms of, so the second paragraph, the district aims to have consistency in grading. So consistency in grading is a very general term. So how do we actually apply something like that? So for example, extra credit, test corrections, allowing some teachers allow test corrections after a test and then their test grade goes up. Some teachers don't. So there's just, I'm just looking for how we institute consistency in grading. So again, if this is 30,000 feet, I'd like to know where we're going with the detail. And then in that same paragraph, parents, guardians, and students, middle of the paragraph, parents, guardians, and students should have access to grades. Is that an intentional use of the word should? Because I would like our children and parents to have access to the grades prior to the term being published.
I think what you're saying is it should be mandatory, not discretionary, because that's one of my comments. I'm sorry to jump in there, but
No,
I was questioning the word choice, that it should be either will have access, shall have access. There should be no question that they have access.
No, I understand the question. Maybe I can give you a little insight into like an example, right? So a high school teacher gives a final on the last day of the year. They then go and grade the final, and the final is put into the average of the quarter. The timing between submitting that grade for the final and submitting the grade for the quarter or the term is very close together, and it might be almost simultaneous. So that's why it was purposeful to put in should, because what you're trying to do is make a philosophical statement that you would want parents and students to have access to grades before they become published. But I just wanted to make you aware that there are times when the window of time between a final and a publishing on a term is going to be very close, if not simultaneous.
So can we still use the word shall there, but then put a clarifier about end of term grades and tests at the end of terms, that there could be a conflict there or some kind of a, is there a way to be specific and still use the word shall?
So I would say the answer to that is yes. It all depends, how low do we want to drop the plane, right? If we're at 30,000, if you start going into this level of detail, you're really talking about a regulation. But I see Dr. Hines' hand up.
Yes. So good morning, everybody. So I think, and that to your question, the policy needs to stay at 30,000 feet. When it gets below that, that's our job. I think one of the things that this board is striving for, as we are as well, is to be as consistent as possible. With that, as Dr. Shields just said, it's about, the regulations or the procedures that we have in place. And this is not just a high school thing. I don't think, not that you're intimating it's just a high school thing. This is something really that's K-12 for sure. But I caution the board, if we start dipping into 25, 20, it starts getting into administration or administrative duties. So I think this is a great first step, by the way, and I applaud the board and this committee and our teachers and our administrators for looking at this and reviewing it and being, I think, in a good place with it. If we need to tweak and modify after, this policy is in place, then we can certainly revisit that.
I just want to jump in there. I know an issue exists at the high school, and this is very real, and it's been going on for a while, where students, I guess they could go to the teacher to find out how they're doing in a particular quarter. It could be September, October, November, December. It doesn't have to be May or June when there's a final or a midterm. And when we have an electronic system, all students should be able to expect with certainty that their grades will be posted in a somewhat timely manner, so they know how they're doing. Am I doing okay on homework? Am I doing okay on the quizzes? And more importantly, the parents can see independently of the students, because the students are still minors. So the parents should have a window into how their kids are doing, because on the other hand, not all kids will share that information with the parents. So rather than the parents having to call every teacher and say, how's my kid doing? They can go into name the platform and see, here's how my child is doing the homework. There's zeros there. Why? So I understand the 30,000 foot issue. I understand the issue with finals, but I, as a parent who has lived this real time and watched other parents and children live this real time in this district, I truly don't understand why we can't require teachers to post grades, not final grades, but individual grades, so that students, and more importantly, parents, because we're asking parents to be partners. So parents have to have access to this very important data. I'm asking you to reconsider that word. That word. I don't know how else to say how as a parent and representing parents and students in real time, that this is an issue for many.
Definitely. And I think as somebody who is not only a sitting board member, but as a parent, you have that perspective, which is incredibly important. I think where we don't want the lines to get blurred is where the teacher contract is, where we could talk about some of the things that need to take place. I don't see this living in policy. I see this living with the concern that you're bringing up, living in, as far as either contractual obligations that we want to see embedded and or administrative expectations and implementing them. So I don't see that specifically living in a broad policy per se, but it is what you bring up, and I've heard that in multiple venues. The expectation is if my child's taking X class, I should at any given point, either myself or my child should be able to log in and see how am I doing? How am I faring? Within reasonable time, 24 hours, 48 hours, whenever a test was taken. But I think if we start getting very, I'm not saying hyper specific, but specific enough in a policy, I think that is it's a dangerous place to be. And so I'm cautioning us right now to at least allow us to take this first step with this grading policy per se, and then allow us to do some of the deeper work that has to take place as far as consistency in implementing this policy, as far as what our expectations are. But your concern, Deborah, is incredible, and Nanette are real, and it's something that certainly Dr. Shields and the rest of district office really want to focus on with a real solution.
So would this live in regulations?
I think this would live in regulations, and my having a conversation with union leadership along with district office to bring this in the forefront of what our concerns are, and then to really come up with a plan to make this go away, so to speak.
Nan, I interrupted you because I was just piggybacking on your comment. I'm sure you have more. Do you want to?
No, I'm still not comfortable with this. I really, I would rather it say shall. It's a board policy that I understand your perspective of it, Dr. Hines, and I understand that we want to execute a lot of this through regulation, and that makes a lot of sense. But I still think we need shall. So, but speaking about going down beyond 30,000 feet, I know I'm not talking about it in terms of this policy necessarily, but what are the next steps for the detail? Questions such as weighted grades. Do we still use them? Do we believe in them? How do we create consistency in grading? Where do those details come in? Is there a plan to develop regulations? How is that going to proceed?
So weighted grades. So we're having, I think, philosophical discussions that are, and I mean this in the nicest way, that are outside the purview, I think, of what this policy is intended for. If we talk about weighted grades, and I think some of you know how I feel about that, and some of you may be congruent in your thoughts as the way that I feel about that. We know that colleges, universities really don't care if you have a 4.7. They strip it down and they look at the courses you took and what your grade was as far as your overall GPA. I would much prefer, if we're speaking about weighted grades or anything else that's attached to grading, that we wait for the new high school principal to see what he or she has to say about that. And I think also we need to have, again, conversations with high school teachers who I am quite certain have very well-intended thoughts as far as how they feel about that. And that's why I'm saying, at least as an operating system, let's start with this. Let's see how it goes. And then, like I said, if we need to tweak it, we can certainly do that, and we could assess whether it's it's working or not. But if we're talking about philosophically, weighted grades or consistent as far as teachers, let's say, posting grades within X amount of time, those are very different conversations than what Dr. Shields shared as far as the policy with the administrators and the teachers. That's all I'm saying.
I think what we could do, since this is committee, is we take this to, when it's on for a first read, we can decide as a committee what the word should be. And we also take it to the rest of the board. And if the rest of the board feels strongly that parents must have access, then either that's our recommendation or we leave it as it is and we have a discussion.
Okay.
And
So
anything else?
Ms. Brooks, do you want us to leave it as should, put it on for first reading and have a discussion at the board level, or what's the sense of the committee?
Well, I don't want to cut Ms. Melkonian off because I don't know if she has more comments. I was just trying to wrap up that particular issue and ask Dr. Block what his recommendation is. Ms. Melkonian, I know what your recommendation is. I've voiced my opinion, and we can take it. Yeah, obviously, we'll take it to the board. I will flag this issue and say, here's what the committee thinks. Here's what the superintendent thinks. What does everybody else think? Because I think we're stuck on this word. I hear it. And I've heard it from community comments, by the way, and from emails we have received from the community. This is important.
Yeah, I want to get the policy approved. So I want to bring it to the board as is and then move from there at this point. I think it's a new policy and, you know, we've gotten buy-in, and let's get this approved and then we can improve it over time.
Ms. Bays?
I actually agree with Dr. Block, and I think that this is a first step, and I do respect and hear what we are being told about it being a 30,000-foot view. And I ask the committee to consider one thing. So what happens when it doesn't happen? So we're so concerned about making the word from should to shall, and then what? So when it doesn't get done, what happens? So I just think, again, as a board, we make the actual overall policy, and then it is up to the administration to put it into practice. And I do think, you know, we all have different experiences as parents. I will say my experience as a parent with my children is that they always had access to their teachers and to their grades. They didn't have a problem. They knew where they stood. So some parents don't. I think we all have different experiences, and I think we should listen at this point to what, as a starting point, as Dr. Bach has said, this is a new policy. Let's put it in place, and then we can assess it. And I think, as Dr. Hines said, there'll be a new principal. We can assess it at the high school. Of course, this is a policy for K-12, not just for the high school. So that's just my input.
Any other comments on this or any other aspects of the policies before I share my concerns and comments? No. Okay. So first, thank you, Dr. Shields, Dr. Hines, and to the teachers who were involved. This is a maiden voyage for this school district, and it's a really important one. So I appreciate the thought and the work and the time that has gone into this. I truly do. I feel very good about having this as a policy. So in the my computer went dark. In the second paragraph, the first line, we had questioned what grading systems meant. I went back to my notes from the very beginning, and we were saying, well, what does it mean? And so I just want to make sure that the rest of the committee is still okay with it saying grading systems, because we were having different interpretations. Well, what does grading system mean? Are we okay? I'm okay with the language personally. I'm just asking the committee, are you still wondering what this means, or can we, this is from the NISPA template, can we just follow this? I'm just kind of circling back based on comments that from my notes from earlier meetings.
I wanted to respond to what I think was a question back then. You know, was this a technical thing, or was it more about the grading itself? So we broke out the 3 different levels and how, because there are different grading systems at each of the 3 levels. You know, there's performance summary reviews at the elementary level. There's once a grading system in place at the middle school, then there's a grading system in place at the high school, which is why we broke it out. You may recall in the first draft, it didn't speak to the nuances between the 3 different levels. So we thought that was important to help define that for the audience.
That answers my question. Everybody good? Okay. In the fourth line down where it says grading may be based upon student improvement, achievement, and participation in classroom discussion activities. Why is it may? Would it be may among other things? Because if it's not based on student improvement, achievement, and participation, I guess it's also homework. I don't know if homework should be in there, but if it's may, I'm not sure I understand why that word was chosen. Could it be may among other things, or in other words, what is it based on if it's not based upon student improvement, achievement, participation in classroom and activities? And then I would add homework.
Well, I think what we're trying to do is to acknowledge that there's differences in each level. You know, how you grade a kindergartner versus how you grade an 11th grader who's sitting in an AP class. There is going to be differences in how you do that. So what we're trying to do is to make it broad and more of a philosophical statement instead of being very specific, and allow the understanding that there's a real difference as we're looking at our wide range of K to 12.
That makes sense to me. Shall we add homework to that?
You could if you wish.
So we let people know that parents know that that's a possibility. Any objection to adding that? Since it's not mandatory, it's may. Dr. Block, thumbs up. Yes, okay. Also because it dovetails with the homework policy, where it talks about homework may be part of a grade. Okay, so we will add homework to that. Okay, the second to last, oh, excuse me. Going back to the sentence, not the word should, parents / guardians and students should have, it says access to grades. Is there a way to say convenient access, or in other words, how will they, and maybe it goes in regulations, but how will they have access to the grades? I mean, right now we know that at least in the high school, they have immediate access through Aspen, but do we want to define the access, or am I getting too nitty gritty?
Yeah, I would say the how is where we live.
Okay.
If that's okay with you.
Yeah, fine with me. Then the next sentence, oh, I'm sorry, in that is also in that sentence, parents and guardians should have access to grades prior to the grade of the term being posted. What about prior to a parent-teacher conference? Can we put and or prior to a parent-teacher conference? So when a parent goes into the conference, they already have an understanding of how that child is doing and can have a more meaningful conversation with the teacher, which right now is at the elementary school level, unless they request a conference at the secondary level.
I'm not opposed. Yeah, I'm not opposed to the language. I just it's a very specific situation, which makes me, want to start thinking about, well, what are the exceptions to that? And I'm not sure, if that's something that's realistically deliverable consistently. That's just my wondering with you right now.
Yeah, I have the same thought. I think, Ms. Brooks, if that's a consideration, I think Chris and I would need to go back to administration to have a conversation about that, because I think I'm sensing the same thing that Chris is.
So I'm trying to make the parent-teacher conference a productive session where the parent is not going to be surprised and then have to come unprepared to respond to a surprise in the event that happens. So is that something internal that would need, I've not experienced this personally, but it's occurred to me, it would be helpful for a parent before they go in, thinking everything's fine with their child, only to be met with, really, no, homework hasn't been turned in on time, whatever it is. I would hope that the teacher would flag the parent, especially at the elementary school level beforehand. But I was just thinking, where else would it be helpful for parents to know what's going on in the classroom? And I thought, well, before a parent-teacher conference. So in practical terms, I don't know if that belongs in the policy or not, which is why I'm raising it and asking the question.
Should that be a regulation?
A
or
regulation
a
also.
conversation about regulation?
So I'm happy to have that in regulations.
Yeah, so I know there are two hands raised, so with your permission, I'd like to supersede that just for a second.
Sure.
So being a parent myself, and I'm going to go back to elementary school, and I think this has happened in maybe some of our buildings. It may have happened to one of our board trustees this year, where they entered the parent-teacher conference in the fall without a report card, let's say, right? So the question becomes, how does that happen? How is that useful or helpful to a parent? And those are really, I'd say, very real concerns. I do want to backtrack a little bit and say, my expectation, my thought process is that teachers at all levels, but I'm going to say specifically at the elementary level, where the parent-teacher conferences are living, at least at this moment, there is communication between the parents and the teacher as far as how kids are faring. And if a student is struggling at some point or let's say exceeding expectations, our hope is the teacher is communicating, whether it's in written form or in telephone or whatever it may be. But the conversation regarding the timing, I think, is something that, like I said, that Dr. Shields and I would like to at least have the opportunity to talk to the principals to see what are some of the potential challenges in this taking place. So if the board policy says this has to happen, we need to understand. And again, I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying, Deborah. I just want to make sure that we understand the implications, not just the first 3, but, the first 9 or 10. And then we can come back to you with more information if that's where, this committee is looking to go. But, I think Chris and I, our spider sense is tingling at this point. That's why we're asking to just suspend it just for a little bit so we can get some more information.
I saw a hand raised. I saw Dr. Block.
Yeah, so it's my strong preference to, rather than adjusting the policy that we have buy-in on the policy that we have. Let's get the policy that we have through and passed by the board. And then we can make potential recommendations, to adjust it once it's on the books, rather than, I don't want to restart this process and potentially derail it.
Thank you for your comment. Ms. Melkonian?
So going through this, it sounds like, again, this is the 30,000 foot level, but we have a lot of, I guess, the regulation questions. So I asked this before, after we go through this process, what happens in terms of regulation? How does that process take place in terms of all of our very specific questions?
So once this policy comes into play, then Dr. Shields and myself and the cabinet would sit down with the principals and talk about what next steps we need to take place as far as creating these new regulations, and then to ensure the consistency throughout the buildings as far as how that would take place.
I just muted myself. Anybody else? Okay, so we'll move on without that addition for now. Okay, in the next sentence, parents, guardians shall be provided a written report card 3 times a year, etc. I completely appreciate that, except there's no written report card at the high school. So I didn't know, we don't want to force the high school to send out a written report card. So if you could just tweak that language, and I don't know what goes on at the middle school, if there's a written report card or if it's electronic, but you can say, I don't know if you, because at some point at the elementary school, it may also be an electronic report card. So however you want to fix that.
I
think that-
understand. I totally agree with you and understand the point. Let's remove the word written because it is now electronic at all 3 levels.
Okay.
We can use the typewriter. No, I'm just kidding.
It's an inside joke. Okay. All right, so now
Question on that?
under, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I have a question on that. I had heard that there were some issues actually with parents being able to access report cards because they're electronic. Have we addressed that issue? Have you been apprised of that issue?
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Is it because of access to the system itself? I haven't heard about that, but if a parent is having difficulty, they should certainly contact the principal and or teacher. Well, if it's high school, the principal or assistant principal they're assigned to rectify that. If we're talking about a family potentially not having, well, they have a Chromebook now, so they should be able to access it through that. I want to make sure, of course, every parent has the opportunity to do that, but I haven't heard it as of here. Have you, Dr. Shields, heard of parental access?
I have not, but I imagine that our principals would be very responsive to that.
Sure.
If there was a concern.
Yeah.
Okay, under discipline grades, where it goes into the parentheses, e.g. giving lower grades for, I guess that should be a number 1 rather than the little I. Absences is not modified. And I was wondering, is it all absences where classroom participation is a relevant criterion? So for example, if a child has mono or whatever, a surgery or whatever it is that prevents a child from being in school, can we modify that by saying unexcused, lower grades for unexcused absences where classroom participation is a relevant criterion, so that we don't penalize a child who is legitimately unable to attend school for a prolonged period of time, for example?
I believe we could modify it that way.
Thank you. And then the little I for plagiarism, that should be a number 2. And then it says a lower grade can be given for failure to complete assigned work or for lack of class participation. So one of the things we discussed when we were discussing the homework policy, was some children make an earnest attempt to complete homework, but they can't because it's developmentally inappropriate, or they're struggling, or they were working on it till 2:00 in the morning and just couldn't manage it. So I'm concerned where it says a lower grade can be given for failure to complete assigned work, where that failure happens after an earnest attempt at trying. So I'm just pointing that out, that we had that discussion in the homework policy, and I just wanted to make sure that we somehow I understand it can be given and not shall be given. So I don't know where that falls within the policy. I just read it and I thought I wanted to voice my concern. So that was that thought. And then also for lack of class participation, there are some students who are not comfortable participating for reasons I don't know for sure, but they're shy, they're insecure, they're awkward, they feel uncomfortable speaking. So I wouldn't want such a child to be penalized potentially. So those are my 2 thoughts on that sentence.
I completely understand your examples that you gave there. Do you have a preference for a different, as you noted, it does say can, it doesn't say, shall or must. Do you have a preference for other wording in that sentence? It's just making it available. It doesn't mean it has to be employed.
I always am do no harm. So I would not want our policies to inadvertently harm children who would fall in that gap. I don't know the right wording. I just know what my concern, I'm trying to think of, potential ramifications down the road.
Deb, can I just interrupt? I think we're getting very involved in details, and I think we've heard, at least from Madam Block, and I did concur. This is a 30,000 foot view. I do not think we should be going in this type of detail. I'm sorry, but it's 10:20. We've kind of made commitments to end these meetings on time. You have a lot of policies on the agenda for today, and maybe going forward, if there's going to be this much detail, I know the committee gets the information and gets the agenda in advance, maybe make your recommendations internally. And so this way, I'm just talking, we have a lot of stuff that you need to talk about. If maybe we don't just get into so many details and try to stay within our 30,000 foot overall picture.
I understand the time crunch, but I'd rather do this right the first time than have to go back and fix it. So anyway, that's my concern. I don't know if somebody wants to noodle around with that wording. Or we say, no, this is a do no harm policy somewhere. The goal of this is to do no harm. I would be happy with that language. I just want to,
But do no harm is a philosophical thing, right? So I think the question, then you're changing, because then if there's no do no harm, then why have grades?
Okay.
Do no harm. We're all doing well. So I don't know that again, I think what that type of thing may, and Dr. Hines and Dr. Shields, you can correct me, if you're starting to add statements like that, it does need to go back to the administrators and to the teachers who are actually doing the work. So I think you're stalling getting this on for a first reading. So I'm just putting it out as far as process.
Ms. Melconian, Dr. Hines has his hand raised.
Oh, no, yeah, go ahead. I'll go after you.
So in terms of the 30,000 foot level, I feel like that is very specific. And perhaps that belongs in regulation.
You mean this sentence, this last sentence?
Yes.
I'm just going to add my 3 cents at this point. I philosophically and fundamentally, I agree with what you're saying. There are all sorts of kids who may not want to participate for a myriad of reasons, whether they're shy. I think the operative word, as Dr. Shields said, was can. So that gives the flexibility for the teacher. And I think in many cases, I can't say all, but in many cases, this is the type of discretion that teachers use already within their classrooms. So this is something that's common. So whether it's in the policy or not, this is, I think, the way that teachers operate for the most part. And, at the beginning of the year, I think the expectation should be made. This is what the teacher chooses to use as a grading system. Because again, the word is can. Is, how much does it count for? 5%, 10% of a child's overall grade. I think there's some variance in that. So I believe that's taking place already. And if the policy says must, or it's erased, I think then we're having a different conversation. So fundamentally, I agree with you, or I should say philosophically, what Dr. Block said before. I think the way it is right now, and it's, Nisbet cobbled this together, most of it, right? I mean, probably 99% of it. It's a good template starting point. And again, if philosophically as a board and as a district office that we agree that we want to make sure and ensure that there is a do no harm for our kids who, for whatever reason, are vulnerable, then we can certainly tackle that, I think, in a different way where it doesn't need to live in policy. But the can, I think, gives that teacher the flexibility.
I don't know if that sentence was part of the NISBA template, just to let you know. I know the the first part of it,
That
the
was
grading
added.
one,
Okay.
I don't want to misspeak. I'm just looking through because I was wondering where that came in. I don't remember seeing it there, but all right, on your recommendation, I will leave that in. I've made my comments on that. Okay, and now let's see. So down in the cross, I basically don't have anything else. Down in the cross-reference section, we should add homework, the homework policy, which is number 4730. I would like to see it added as a cross-reference. And then do we want to put in here some line that says the superintendent shall make regulations consistent with this policy, or whatever we need in here to direct the superintendent to do everything we've been talking about here? Is there a line that goes in a policy that makes that happen?
Yes, there is, and we can add
Okay.
that.
Great, thank you. Okay. Just as an aside, I know there had been a community comment about putting the grading practices into the Schreiber handbook. I haven't had a chance to look at that handbook. I don't know if that was done. So since we're here on the grading policy, I'm just saying a reminder to see if grading practices have made it into Schreiber land. Any other comments? We'll move on. Sorry for the rustling of my papers. Okay, so let's move on to homework. Thank you, everybody. Great work. Okay, so for homework, Dr. Shields, you want to give us a little background before we go ahead?
Yes, of course. So the homework policy is a policy that we are revising, and we have reviewed other districts' policies. We've also looked at the NYSBA policy. You've also given a good amount of feedback on what you were hoping to see in a new draft policy. And I did my best to try and incorporate all of that feedback here in this draft. After doing that, I then shared the draft with central office administration, got approval from them. Then I went out to the district-wide administration, got feedback from them. And then following that, I went to the teacher leadership and asked them to review it. They had a number of teachers look at it as well, and called me about with some very minor edits, because so much of this policy is already referred to in the professional growth and curriculum development review of homework practices, which came to the board, I want to say roughly a year ago. So for example, the time expectations for homework, so much of that came out of the professional growth and curriculum development committee at the elementary level and the high school level. So then I went to the middle school and I said, look, I need some guidance from the middle school. They provided that. Then the high school committee took a look at this draft that you have and wanted to put their minutes in alignment with the structure of the elementary and the middle school, because what was in the PGCD recommendation was looking at things slightly differently. But this allowed it to have a better flow from the K to 12 spectrum. So they brought those edits back to me, which I thought was very helpful in the process and very collaborative. So I now bring it back to you. Some of it you will see is from the original policy, but some of it is new language that I hope addresses the questions that you've raised in your feedback to me at an earlier meeting.
Thank you for the very thorough process and for guiding that. Any comments, questions? Dr. Block, I see you just unmuted yourself.
Yes, I'm thrilled with this. I love the consistency. I love the clarity of it. I like that it flows nicely across the grade levels. So thank you, Dr. Shields, for all your due diligence on this. I think this looks like a really good policy that I'm going to support.
Thank you, Ms. Melkonian.
Thank you for all of this. And the collaboration is wonderful to see. I don't love the breakout of the time. I think it's actually still too much. So if you break it really by grade, the way a lot of the research says, we're a little high in terms of the times. And is there, I don't remember reading it, forgive me if I missed it. Is there somewhere that we can talk about that homework needs to be developmentally appropriate, and if homework is not being completed, that should be a discussion between the parent and the teacher?
I'm going to jump in. I actually, in the very last paragraph where it talks about the IEP requirements supersede the guidelines, I had put in there the question that homework must be developmentally appropriate for each child. And then to segue in that, in addition, any IEP plan requirements shall supersede the policy. So I don't know if, because we had talked about developmental appropriateness for each child. So Dr. Shields, I don't know if that would be an appropriate place to insert language, because there's a 30,000 thing. We do want it to be developmentally appropriate for each child.
Yeah, yes, and of course, we as administrators would completely agree with that. I'm just scanning back through the policy to see if we've referred to that in any other location. But if we haven't, I think adding that in is certainly reasonable.
Ms. Melkonian?
I have one more thing. So the breakout of time is really about being developmentally appropriate, and philosophically that, children should not be spending exorbitant amounts of time doing homework on a daily basis. So what I find inconsistent with that is changing how we think of students and the time they should spend doing homework when we talk about students in advanced courses. And to me, they're still students in 9th through 12th grade. So to me, it doesn't matter that they're in advanced courses. Developmentally, they're still 9th graders, 10th graders, 11th graders, 12th graders. And I think we're inconsistent by saying that advanced students should be spending more time doing homework.
So I would go ahead.
All right, now we're really getting into the meat of something that is incredibly important, I think, for each of us, because at some point we've all experienced homework, whether as a parent or certainly as a student. Nan, I really love what you're saying. I appreciate it. What are your thoughts about introducing up to 10 to 15 minutes, up to, so the teacher has flexibility, where it doesn't have to go to the ceiling right away, where there is some flexibility. Now, I know that may cause some concern for others, saying then we're not being consistent if it's up to, but it's something I think that we may want to consider. If you add, let's talk AP courses for a second. Let's say we have a student taking 5 AP courses, 240 minutes, times that by a week, even by 4 days if it's not 5 days, or if there's weekend homework. That's just for the AP courses. That's almost a part-time job doing something like that. So I agree. It's all about balance. How do we find some balance with all of this? More doesn't always mean better. So the flexibility part of it, I think, is important. But I do, I'm not all for putting time frames there. But I agree with Dr. Block that it does at least outline expectations. And so from an expectation standpoint, I think that's really powerful. The flexibility and where our concern is striking a balance. So I love the fact that we can embed developmentally appropriate, whether a child has an IEP or not. And the up to part of it means that there's flexibility where they don't have to go to the max. That would be my recommendation.
So if I could share two thoughts on that. Number one, I did find the phrase, it's not developmentally appropriate, but at the end of the last sentence in paragraph 2, homework should be appropriate to the age, ability, and independent level of students. I had thought it was in there. So I just wanted to point that out to the committee that is recognizing that there is going to be great variability here potentially, but depending on where the child is in the learning curve. I think the up to, I wanted to share with you a conversation I had with Ms. McLean about that phrase up to, when it refers to the time limits, because I know there's an importance from this committee that there's some consistency across teachers on a grade level specifically, right? So I'll share with you that, when I was an elementary principal, I had 2 teachers on the same grade level who philosophically, one believed in homework, the other one believed in no homework. So if we were to insert up to, that teacher would assign no homework because up to could mean nothing. And the teacher who believes in homework would assign whatever the minutes are in our policy. Now, I know that's an extreme example, but I understand your goal, Dr. Hines, is to build in flexibility, which of course we would all want for our teachers. And I agree with that completely. But I was trying to eliminate that outlier teacher who says, I don't believe in any homework in 4th grade. And then you have the teacher next door. And I've experienced this when you had twins on a grade level. One teacher says no homework, and the other teacher is giving, 45 minutes to an hour every night. So we were trying to avoid that outlier situation. So I just share that story with you, as we're having this conversation.
Yeah, no, it's duly noted, and it's a really important point for sure. Again, this is I think, when was the last time this was updated? When Clinton was in the White House? I mean, it was like a long time ago, right?
94.
Yeah. So it's been a while. I think most of you know how I feel about homework. I think there's definitely a time and place for it. The concern is when the pendulum swings too far in one direction. So, Dr. Shields, I appreciate that perspective. The cookie cutter approach makes me a little uneasy. However, you have sought input from our educators, right? So both teachers and administrators. And I need to respect that. At times, which is hard for me, I need to suspend any certainty that I have about certain things. This is something that I typically feel pretty certain about. But again, in a means to an end, I don't want to be an obstacle in this. I think then if we go back to the philosophical understanding as far as the board and certainly ourselves here in district office with our principals, we can maybe talk about what our expectations are if we feel that a particular educator is going too far to the extreme one way or the other, and then we could make way that way.
If I can interject, on the template, there was a sentence, because I actually had this note, a sentence that says, teachers are cautioned to avoid overloading students with excessively lengthy homework assignments. Would Ms. Malcone, would that help here? It was on the NISPA template.
I see it, and it helps. I would like the AP and honors thing removed. I think it sends a really bad message.
I understand what you're saying, but playing devil's advocate, the amount of homework in the AP and honors courses, because of the amount of material that has to be covered, I don't know that it's feasible to confine it to a maximum of 180 minutes a week, just from the experience I see in my home. So I also want to be in step with reality. And I don't know how to balance that. Because, Ms. Bays?
I actually have a question. And I don't know if Dr. Hines or Dr. Shields can answer this question. So what happens when it's 242 minutes? Like, who's reporting? How are we tracking this? I understand that this was the recommendations and it was in the PGCD overall recommendation. I understand that we have board members who wanted to include this in the policy. And now we're talking about, the difference between an AP course and a non-AP course and, adding up. But I'm just curious, who's monitoring this? So I, as a parent, see my child doing 242 minutes of homework in that AP class. Then what? Like, I don't understand. We're spending a lot of time on details. So is there something we could do? So let's say teacher is assigning, what happens? I'm really asking because I don't know what the point of the details is at this point. If you could explain to me what the process would then be.
So I don't know if you saw, it's in the budget. We have a homework police officer that's going to go around checking.
Okay,
I'm totally kidding. Listen,
I have a few people I think that could take the job.
In all seriousness, I look at this as guidelines, right? So these are expectations, guidelines. So, again, if a parent sees that, it's above and beyond what the guidelines are, I think the recommendation would be to speak to the teacher, speak to the principal. So that's not taking place, so we can have some sort of modification of that particular homework, which I know teachers do. They modify homework assignments often. And Dr. Shields, I want to be clear, as far as who set eyes on this particular policy, it was administrators and teachers.
Correct, it was. And the word guidelines is also, in here for a reason.
Yeah.
There needs to be a little flexibility.
Definitely.
And again, we all like to talk about our experience as parents. My experience as a parent is that when there was too much or too little, I found that the teachers that my children went and advocated for themselves, obviously not in the elementary level, but at the high school level specifically, when we're talking about AP courses, I never had an experience. I had two different sets of students with two different sets of AP courses that things weren't worked out. So I do want us to remember that should be guidelines, and we should always try to not get so involved. And I think to what Dr. Block has said, this is addressing some of the concerns that have been had. And if we, keep in mind that they're guidelines, we can go forward.
Dr. Block?
So Emily, I want to answer how I envision, the enforcement of this to go. I feel like I'm going to make Dr. Hines nervous when I say that, but I don't think I will with my answer. So basically what I envision is that if you have a teacher that is sort of, on the high side and notorious for that, then you have a couple of parents that sort of evaluate, or the kids evaluate this, and then they sort of reach out to the principal, and then the principal can do an assessment of whether these kids are crazy and it's not really that amount of time, or it's not that consistent, or whether these kids are on par, and then have a discussion on how you can reduce that homework load. Or on the flip side, I think it is a preponderance of students. I don't think it is like one or two students. And I certainly don't think it's 1 or 2 weeks. I think this is a consistent, would have to be consistent across, and would just create some sort of expectations. And I think as an educator, it is helpful for me to have those. So I sort of know what is expected of me as an educator to provide for my students. So I think it is valuable all the way around.
Okay, Ms. Melconian, do you have any other comments? Okay, so I have some nitpicky ones and then some substance ones. So in the second paragraph, the first sentence, actually it's the second line, but first sentence, it says, and to pursue products which do not lend themselves, it should be that. And in the second sentence, teachers should assign meaningful homework that fosters instead of which. And I didn't understand the word pre-teaching. What does that mean?
So this is a secondary, typically a secondary approach that's used where they will give homework on a lesson that they're going to be teaching tomorrow. So students can come in with a foundational understanding before being taught the lesson.
Okay, is this is that the flipped classroom? Is that what that means? It's an industry term. Okay. What? I don't know why I have a question mark there, so I'll skip that. The last sentence says homework should be appropriate, where you pointed out, Dr. Hines, to age, ability, and independent level of, I would say, each student instead of students. If you will, please. In the third paragraph, first sentence also should come out. It should be effective homework assignments should develop initiative, responsibility, so forth and so on. And then where it says promote parents' understanding, it should say promote a parent/guardian's understanding, because not everybody has two parents. Or a parent, you might have a parent or a guardian. And then in the fourth paragraph, in the template at the end of the fourth paragraph, I would like to see added that sentence I read from the template, which teachers are cautioned to avoid overloading students with excessively lengthy homework assignments. I mean, the template goes on to say, or with overly brief and empty assignments, but I'm going to trust our teachers aren't doing that. But I do want to caution with the overloading students with excessively lengthy homework assignments, if that's okay. I'm just taking it from the template.
Javi, you have that? Okay, good.
And also from the template, it talks about adequate time being given and due dates being reasonable. I don't know if we can put that in tandem with the avoiding overloading students. And then I don't know if this goes into regulation, but in the template, it says on the almost the last paragraph on the template above the minutes per day, it says students and parents or guardians should be aware that homework counts as blank % of the student's grade. I don't know that that's necessary. I think that's probably regulation. But I don't know if there's something that should go in there to make parents aware that homework may be considered part of a student's grade.
I think we've discussed, I think we have that noted in our new grading policy, so I'm not sure it
Okay.
needs to live here as well.
Okay, great. So then we'll just make sure we're cross-referencing grading. I'll add that to my last comment. Then under our draft, the following limitations should be observed. In number 3, we had agreed that instead of saying he, she, we would say they or their. So it would read, homework should not take so much of the child's time that they are denied opportunities to engage in other activities of their own choosing. Then the next paragraph, teachers should create and share a variety of forms of homework throughout each grade level. So we talked about consistency. We have consistency in the grading policy. We have a great line that talks about consistency across sections, buildings, grades, so forth and so on. Do we want to have, because I don't see anywhere in the homework policy where we're actually addressing the consistency / inconsistency that I'll say irked Dr. Block. So I'm wondering, or concerned, I'll say concerned. So I'm wondering if there is any place in this policy where we can talk about consistency. So in that line where it says teachers should create and share a variety of forms of homework throughout each grade level. I know the consistency doesn't go there, but can there be some place in the policy to maybe lift up the consistency line from the grading policy and put it into the homework policy and say homework shall, to the greatest extent possible, homework shall be consistent across sections, classrooms. And I know it creates problems with sections within a building and also building to building with the 5 elementary schools. Or that consistency could be obliterated by the teacher who doesn't believe in giving homework, and the teacher who believes in giving up to 15 minutes. So I'm raising this as a concern that has been voiced in the past by both community members and board members, and I'm seeking guidance.
So that sentence there is a statement about what we value. That we value that teachers on a grade level are sharing the types of homework that they are giving. Teachers, as you know, are teaching at different points in the continuum of the curriculum on a given day. So I would not want to see something about consistency in the homework that is expected from class to class on a specific day, because the teachers are just in a different place. I would also say that even within the same class, 3 different students might get 3 different forms of homework. So there's not going to be the consistency because those 3 students are developmentally at different places in the learning continuum. So I think the reason this sentence is in here is because we really need to make sure teachers are aware of what's being delivered in other classrooms, the types of homework, so they can then not just have the awareness, but maybe use a type of homework that's being used in another classroom in their classroom if they see it developmentally appropriate for the students in which they're teaching. So where I think it belongs in the grading piece, I wouldn't want to see it in too much specificity here in the homework piece, because the operational side of delivering homework needs to be very flexible.
I understand. Thank you for that. Okay, then on the second page of the policy, in the second line that begins parents, again, it would be parents / guardians. And the same for the last line, parents / guardians are encouraged to contact the teacher if they have questions or concerns. And then the last paragraph, I would just take out the words, it should be noted that, and I would begin the sentence, in all cases, any individual education plan requirements, blah, 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 blah. And then I know we talked about a child handing in incomplete homework not being penalized if they tried to do it but couldn't. I don't know if there's a place in the policy to say it's a policy matter. If we know a child tried but handed in incomplete homework despite trying, that child should not be penalized. I don't know if, to me, it's a policy issue. It's a global philosophy. I don't know if it belongs in this policy or if there are words to that effect that could go in there. Or if it goes in with the homework should be appropriate to the age, ability, and independent level of each student. Maybe that covers it.
Yeah, I believe that does cover it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. And I don't need to beat that horse. So then my minor cleanup, where it says note prior policy 4730 revised, I think we don't need that in there. And then after approved, we need a colon. After revised, we need a colon. And then when it's revised again, we'll put that new date and then cross-reference grading. And those are the only comments I have. Anybody else? Dr. Block gave a thumbs up. Okay, I see the time. I want to go to community comments. I should have known better with the grading and the homework that this would be ambitious. And I don't want us to have to stay here and keep our administrators again till, so I am going to stop talking. And oops, I just raised my own hand. That was a mistake. I am going to go to the participants. And
Before we move
yeah.
on, can I just ask a point of clarification?
Surely.
So we've had some minor edits on the homework policy. Would you like us to bring it back to committee? Or would you like us to put it
no.
on for first reading? What
Thank
is your
you for
preference?
asking. I think we can put it on for a first read. I can take a look at board docs. Everything has been discussed in public. If I see something that wasn't translated into board doc, into the document, or something that needed to be taken out that was discussed here today, and the committee members similarly, we won't add anything substantively that hasn't been discussed here. So yes, please put it on for a first read, and the grading policy as well.
Thank you very much.
Really, thank you for reminding me. I have to put my hand down. Ms. Bays?
That was my question too, taking my hand down.
Okay, let's move on to community comments. Sandra, hands is raised, so I'm going to lower your hand and I'm going to allow you to talk. Sandra, you should be unmuted now.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can, we can.
Hi, how are you? Thank you. I just wanted to bring up for the homework policy. I know Ms. Melkonian mentioned the need for a change with the AP courses. I know it has been some time that I've been at Schreiber, but I will give an example. Myself being in AP American History, I dropped it fairly quickly, knowing the amount of homework in that specific class, with the current teacher still being a teacher at Schreiber. So I do think that it is something important to consider as far as the amount of AP being relevant for the age of the student. I did not have a parent that voiced a concern when I was dropping it that maybe it was just too much homework given at the time so quickly at the beginning of the school year. Not all students have the same vocal parents. Every student's different. So I do think it would be really beneficial for all the students if that is considered. And I'm not saying necessarily the up to wording that was discussed, but as an example, I dropped AP American History because the homework load was too heavy at the beginning. And I went on to go to Binghamton with a poli-sci major. So luckily I kept with it, like past Schreiber. But I know that was a big thing for me because of the workload. Thank you.
Thank you. I sympathize. I think anybody who has a student at Schreiber knows that, or anywhere actually in the country or the world, the AP workload is notoriously enormous. It's how AP sets up the curriculum. I think I don't know how teachers get around that. I just don't, given the curriculum. But I'm going to I'm just saying it as a parent looking in. It is an extraordinary amount of work. And I'm glad you were able to continue with your studies. It shows the fortitude. It's great. Okay, enough of me babbling. Okay. Mr. Borda, just give me a second to allow you to speak. Mr. Borda, you should be unmuted.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, about 25 years ago, the then superintendent of the schools, Dr. Insera, with Ms. Rossetti, the board president, as well as the majority of the board, came up with a comprehensive plan of change that spoke to many of the points that Ms. Brooks and Ms. Melkonian have brought up here. And it was a great deal of enthusiasm. It was going to be approved until the elephant in the room spoke. That's 25 years ago. So we'll see how many more if another 25 years pass by. Anyway, as far as Mr. Block mentioned, I basically agree with his point. There are many parents, maybe his experience at Salem is different, but there are many parents who are intimidated to speak up for whatever reasons. Some rational, some not so rational. They do not want to come off. And they feel that there might be some repercussions against them. And that's why they use other people to speak for them or urge other people. So all I'm saying is, keep in mind that if the principal doesn't receive a group of 5 people arguing, like the previous speaker said, who are all vocal, you're gonna have a lot of people who are very quiet, living quiet lives of desperation, because that's what it is. And my last point to Ms. Bay's argument, which is a very good question. Who enforces this? How do we as parents make sure that there is an enforcement mechanism? Do you leave it up to, logic says leave it up to the principal. Leave it up to, this is one of the issues that exasperates parents. I totally agree, having been an administrator and a teacher and a parent now, that there are some parents that are crazy and they want whatever. But I'm pretty sure even Dr. Shields, I don't know what school of postgraduate education in administration he went to, but there is such a thing as called clinical supervision. Without clinical supervision, there is no supervision at all. So please keep this in mind. I just want to thank that at least there is some understanding that these issues are there in the committee. Just because you don't hear them, or you might only hear them from someone like me, doesn't mean that they're not real and they do not exist. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you very much for your comments. I'm curious before you go away. Do your comments reflect directly on any particular aspect of the policy that we have been discussing? I heard you discuss it very broadly, because I don't know what Dr. Ansara said.
Well, yeah, it was a more comprehensive plan, and it involved then, having a grades being readily available to parents, and the other things about homework. I mean, I don't have the policy in front of me, but I disagree with Dr. Shields about the proximity of providing grades too close, almost like saying we don't want to inconvenience our educators. Come on, I have been in the schools that had 3,000 students where grades had to go in at a certain time, otherwise we would have a major problem. This is something, not an imposition, but it's something that should be expected. Grades, parents want to see grades on time so that they can deal with them at home and maybe have a conversation with the teacher. Homework, there is homework that is excessive. And I know from friends that are in the middle school, but mostly in the high school, kids are working at 2 o'clock in the morning, doing homework. So, and there is also a type of homework that is meaningless. I have seen that they send me, what do you call examples of the type of homework, and I say, is this valid? Well, what can you say? It is what it is. So you have both extremes. Extreme 3 o'clock in the morning students working, especially in the advanced courses. Very true what Ms. Melconian says, and other students who are wasting their time. So that is the point what I'm addressing. And I just want to say something about the boards of education. You guys are not members of a large corporation. You are members of the community. You can look at Main Street and see what is going on. I do agree with the superintendent that you do not want to have the Board of Education sitting in the back of teachers telling them how to teach every single day. No, that's unacceptable. But there has to be a feeling that someone is accountable, that the parents, that the community can go to someone and get a response. And I will also say that, yeah, sometimes parents are wrong. Sometimes they don't understand the issues. There should be someone saying, look, Mr. or Mrs., this is why this is this way. But when you're giving an answer that doesn't make any sense, like when teachers make mistakes, for example, in mathematics exams, advanced math exams. Most people will not catch those examples, but we have people who are really understanding mathematics. How can that be? How can you not argue and say to the teacher, this is wrong? It doesn't make any sense just not from a parental point of view, but from a mathematical point of view. And it's rebuffed. I am the teacher. Don't talk to me about it. That's all. I don't know if you want any other. I'll be more than glad to supply them.
I have a good understanding of what you were referring to. If there's anything else you want to share with us, of course, feel free to do that. Okay, let me move on to the next community comment. JM, I don't know who you are, but I'm going to lower your hand. Maybe if you could just say your name so we know who you are, and I'm going to unmute you. Oh no, yes, you should be allowed to speak. Let me just make sure.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Hi,
Yes.
it's Jean Marie Lavigny. How are
Hello.
you, Ms. Brooks?
Good, thanks.
I have a couple of comments. The first one is a question. The word developmentally appropriate has been used quite often. I'm sure, as you know, anybody can go and find some authority that claims to say what is developmentally appropriate. Do you find it necessary to maybe put wording in there on where it is going to be derived from? Who's going to determine what's developmentally appropriate? I think that might be important. I've done a little bit of research, and online it does seem the standard is 10 minutes per grade. But there always is somebody who can find something else, some other authority. So I just thought that might want to be looked at. And then regarding the statement, do no harm. I have two children in the system, both different learners, both in accelerated programs, but also they both have learning disabilities. My daughter had, I'd say, one of the best teachers in first grade who got a lot of flack from parents over quote unquote too much homework. However, if any parent listened to the teacher, she would say, if your child is spending more than X amount of time on this homework, don't do it, let me know, because it could be that the whole class is having a problem. And if that's the case, she needs to make sure that the students understand what's going on. And that's at the elementary level. And that was a learning experience for me and what I've always held on to at the elementary level, because if they don't understand how to do that brief homework, then something is missing. And so that's what I always did. If my children didn't know how to do it, and it wasn't just a quick refresher, it went to school incomplete with an explanation to the teacher of what they needed to review. However, at the higher level, when you say first do no harm, if a student is in an advanced class and it's an accelerated program above their grade level, and they are spending 4 or 5 hours doing the homework, then I would say as a parent, maybe they should not be in that advanced class. If it takes that long to do the homework, if they are need a tutor, then maybe they should be in an appropriate, age-appropriate grade level class. I had my own child pulled out. It was during the pandemic. Pandemic learning was not good for accelerated math. Made the decision this was not worth all the time doing it. And I think as a parent, you have to do that and not try to push to have overachievers all the time. But on that same note, I also have another child in many AP classes. There is homework involved. There is homework because you have an AP exam at the end of the school year of whether or not you're going to get college credit. So what would be more harm? To not give them homework which helps them learn the topic so they are on track to take what is, an AP exam, which is going to give them the credit? Or, what would be more harmful, to not give them a lot of homework so they don't have quote unquote enough homework? Or would it be more harmful that they go into the AP exam or go into a unit exam not fully understanding the information? So that's kind of where, which one is more harmful? And I think that needs to be considered at the higher level. And again, as I said, I've had one of the classes for my daughter was a history class. She did drop it. It just wasn't for her. And I don't think there's any harm in trying an AP class and dropping it. It doesn't mean you're any more or less intelligent. Some subjects may not be for you, or some may be not developmentally appropriate at at a certain age. So I think the first, do no harm needs to be looked at, because I think in some cases you are going to do harm by not assigning the appropriate level of homework to make sure there's understanding in a topic. And that is different at the elementary level and at the higher levels.
Yeah, my do no harm language, I think, is not making it into the policy.
Okay.
It was the concept. I'm curious, the developmentally appropriate, when you said define it, are you suggesting we define developmentally appropriate, or the
No, not
source
define.
for-
Yeah, no, not define developmentally appropriate. I mean, if you do a search online, just or whatever, I am not per se an educator, but if you do, parents can, they can Google, they can be Google doctors, they can be Google educators, who is going to determine what is developmentally appropriate, whether it is a national organization that is respected, or how is that going to be determined? Because saying what's developmentally appropriate, like I said, somebody can get some quote unquote authority that says, hey, this is what's developmentally appropriate. And then where is that going to put the school district? From what authority is what I'm kind of like, who's going to determine it, or who's going to have, or could it just be that's the superintendent or the superintendent of curriculum is going to determine, or I just think having the language say developmentally appropriate is so vague that it could cause an issue.
I understand. So Dr. Shields, I know that Dr. Mailey did a tremendous amount of research. And I know that the teachers had the benefit of reviewing that research. Do you, is to Ms. Lavigny's point, do we need to say developmentally appropriate as determined by the assistant superintendent for curriculum, or is it determined by the superintendent, or as determined, do we need to, do we need to qualify how that developmentally appropriate is being determined within the policy?
I'm not sure if it needs to be in the policy, but I do understand the point that Ms. Lavigny's making. And I think that's something you and I can discuss as it relates to the curriculum committee's presentation, and see if there's anything we can glean extra from that committee. I think it was a presentation that Dr. Mealy did. So, why don't you and I have a conversation about that?
Oh, sorry. Okay. Ms. Melkonian?
Correct me if I'm wrong, I don't recall that developmentally appropriate is actually in the homework policy.
We didn't put the words developmentally appropriate. I had mentioned it as a line to be added, and then Dr. Shields correctly directed me to the last sentence of the second paragraph that says homework should be appropriate to the age, ability, and independent level of each student. So maybe there's a reference to some of the research or something that we could put in the policy, the way policies reference case law and things like that. But Dr. Shields made a good suggestion. I'm happy to speak offline about maybe some type of citation or reference that we can include. But Ms. Malconi, to your point, you are correct. I had suggested that line about being developmentally appropriate. Dr. Shields encyclopedically pointed me to the second paragraph. Okay, that's
because I do understand the point that Ms. Lavigny is making about the phrase of developmentally appropriate is very amorphous and can be interpreted very different ways. I really understand that. And I think what we've defined here is much more simple and clear about what we're expecting our staff to do. So I would hope that this phraseology is better and clearer for our community than something like developmentally appropriate, which I agree can be interpreted in so many different ways.
Thank you for your comment, Ms. Lavigny. Thank you for your comment, Ms. Malconi, and redirecting me to the language in the policy. And I know I saw another hand raised. Ms. Brasso, I am going to lower your hand and allow you to speak. Your little mic. Yes, you should be able to speak.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
I think my comment would be related to the grading policy. I'm assuming, I don't know if what I'm about to say is something that happens at all of the elementary schools or just at my son's elementary school, which is Salem. It used to be, the report cards coincide with the parent-teacher conference, and it used to be that you would show up at the parent-teacher conference and you would be handed the report card and then be able to have your conference with the teacher. Since we've moved to putting all of the report cards onto Aspen, they all get put out on the same exact day, which either ends up being anywhere from a day to maybe 10 days after you've had your conference. I believe that the conference should be able to be a dialogue about the grades. And if the parents are not given the grades until after the conference, I think it makes it a little bit less productive. So I'm not sure if there's any reason why parents couldn't be provided the report cards prior to the first day of parent-teacher conference. I'm assuming that they think, parents are going to see it and they might be upset about something and start emailing the teacher. But that's just my guess as to what it is. But I would hope that maybe there could be something in the policy, this doesn't apply to middle school or high school because they just all get their grades on a certain day. But it's a little bit different at the elementary level. I hope that makes sense.
It does. And I don't know if you were tuned in when I actually asked about whether language or prior to a parent-teacher conference could be added into the policy. So I don't know if you're piggybacking onto that or if you—
No, earlier on, I was having some connection problems. So I kept getting kicked off and having to get put back on. So I did miss the portion of the meeting because of that.
Okay. So I had actually suggested the language prior to a parent-teacher conference. And I don't remember exactly what Dr. Hines said, but his recommendation was not to include that language. But now, Dr. Shields, you've heard a parent, not a board member, say that this is an issue in real time in with some of the parents. So I would ask if you could go back to Dr. Hines and discuss this with him. Ms. Brasso echoed my points.
Okay, yeah, if there's a reason why we do it that way, and I knew what the reason was, I might be able to say, oh, okay, but I think that a parent-teacher conference would be more productive for the parent if they could see the grades prior to the conference.
Yes, Ms.
Yes.
Brooks, from our conversation earlier, I'd made a note to myself here that that would be something we would consider under a regulation. The having the parent-teacher conferences or performance summaries in this case at the elementary level available prior to a parent-teacher conference. So I've made a note to consider that for a regulation.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I would just say with regards to regulations, who would I follow up with? Because I don't think are there meetings or committee meetings regarding regulations?
There are not. That's the type of a regulation that would be developed with the curriculum office and the superintendent. So I'm going to share this information with them so that if we go the route of developing a regulation, this level of specificity could be included there.
Okay, so if I would like to follow up at some point, I can either follow up with the assistant superintendent of curriculum or Dr. Hines to find out what happened with this.
Yes, correct.
Thank you.
And I imagine at some point you would bring these regulations to the committee. I don't know if that would be any time within this calendar year, hopefully, but
So
eventually the
just
committee
for-
would.
Just process-wise, the Board of Education is responsible for setting policy. The administration is responsible for setting the regulations. Once the regulations are written by the administration, they are put online next to the policy. So many times if you go onto policies, you'll see policy number 3970R, and that means regulations. So Susan, to your question, when the administration is finished putting together regulations, they will be uploaded next to the policy. So it'll be online.
And if somebody could just let the policy committee know that they've been finished and up there, so that we don't have to refresh every day, that would be great. And I know you will, Dr. Shields. Okay. Can we make, yes. Okay, so no more hands are raised. So our next meeting, so thank you, everybody. We got two very important policies through today, and I appreciate the patience, the thought, the consideration, blah, blah, blah. So our next meeting is after spring break. It will be on May 11th. We will look for the first reads on board docs and make sure that all of our concerns are in there. Javi, as always, if you have any questions, you know where to find me. And
our next meeting will be in person, right? So it will be, we were no longer on May 11th, we will be at the CAM Annex.
Yes, if the governor doesn't extend again, and God willing, we don't have a spike during spring break and all that kind of stuff.
Well, the
Yes,
governor's last change said that there would be no more changes, but you never
I know, but the governor's last change before the last change said there would be no more changes. So I'm just saying.
You never know, but I think we just need to be prepared.
Yes, as of today, we will be in person in the CAM Annex at 9:30 in the morning. So, okay, without further ado, everybody, see you after break. Thank you so much.
Thank you.